started. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Richard Tollison with the Phoenix Philanthropy Group, and this is a part of our regular webinar series. We do these approximately every other month, followed by published articles that we do that are on the same topic. So today what we're talking about is priority setting, goal setting, and visioning. And the success of any campaign and ongoing fundraising initiative, we really feel has a lot to do with the way visioning, priority setting, and goal setting is managed. The quality of those fundraising priorities and goals can be very inspirational and compelling and can generate more than just philanthropic success. It helps to motivate and coalesce leadership and staff. It inspires stakeholders, prospects, and donors. It elevates the profile of an organization, and it helps to build the reputation of the organization. And it declares to the community that the organization is on the move and is ready to more positively impact the community and the future overall. So it's important to think about those longer term aspirational fundraising priorities and then balance them with more current and immediate fundraising needs. So that's what we're going to discuss today. And we have I have three terrific colleagues who are joining us today. First, just a quick little overview of who the Phoenix Philanthropy Group is. I see that many of you are our clients, current and past. And maybe prospective. We've served about 200 clients in the nonprofit and higher education sector. And this topic about visioning, priority setting, and goal setting is something that we are really seeing happen a lot more with our clients. Over the years, we've put through a number of institutions in this process and feel that we've helped to kind of perfect the process, but it's really something that is kind of top of mind for many of our clients. So joining me today is Sarah Stern, and Sarah is the head of marketing and design and higher education. Littman and Hearn is a marketing and design firm in the higher education and not-for-profit space. Sarah is the Executive Vice President of Philanthropic Marketing, and Sarah and her company have been a trusted partner of ours on many clients over the last few years. We have Sabra Diradan, who is a former client and the Executive Director of Development at San Jose State University. Sabra was the person who led the advancement team through their priority setting process, which we assisted them with. Peter Smits is a senior consultant at Phoenix Philanthropy, has a long-standing relationship with the California State University systems, where he was the Vice President of University Advancement at Cal State Fresno, and then served in that capacity in interim roles with a number of other Cal State universities. And my background is primarily in the arts in the higher education space, and the Phoenix Philanthropy Group has been around since 2004. Just as a little bit of housekeeping, we're all in different locations today, each one of us, and my colleague Amy's running the PowerPoint. Yesterday we had a couple of delays on it. We trust that that's not going to happen today, but in case it does, just be patient with us. And Amy and Kelly are going to be monitoring the questions, so please feel free to submit your questions via chat. We will have time at the end of our discussion to have about 10-15 minutes of Q&A. But if something is really pressing and you want to have that question addressed right now, Amy and Kelly will be watching for that. And then finally, we'll have a published article that will come out of this overall presentation and comments and any questions that you all may have today. And that will be following a few weeks after today's presentation. So the outcomes of today's discussion, we hope that it helps to create, helps and understand the creation, the positioning, and sharing of aspirational visions, priorities, and goals. It is the knowledge and tools to enhance your longer term fundraising and your priority setting, and packaging. And Sarah is going to talk particularly about packaging and the case for support. And then it's to help give the strategic framework for managing both those long-term fundraising priorities and those aspirational needs, as well as your immediate fundraising priorities. So why a campaign, or why an enhanced fundraising initiative? Well, it strengthens the mission and the vision of the organization. It generates critical funds. It helps to create a stronger culture of philanthropy within an organization that is infused throughout the organization, where everyone is a fundraiser. See, I told you we're going to have a little delay. It energizes leadership, advocates, and investors, and brings them along to be a part of the solution for the organization. It creates capacity for fundraising, not only for the campaign, but a platform for stronger and more robust future fundraising, transforms the institution, and expands and strengthens community impact overall. So a compelling vision, a transformational priorities, and aspirational goals are a part of what can make a campaign successful. In terms of visioning, priority setting, and goal setting, we feel that it's important that that aligns with the mission, values, and strategic plan of the organization, and potentially a master plan if there is one. We often get a question, what comes first? Does that strategic plan really need to lead the visioning process, or can it happen the other way? Bottom line, your reality is your reality. If you have a strategic plan, you'll build from that strategic plan. If you don't, the visioning process and priority setting process can really help to accelerate the process of putting together a strategic plan, where you talk about relevant and incremental goals versus aspirational and transformational. Relevant and incremental are critically important to the organization and often the foundation of your programs and services. But those aspirational and transformational goals are the exciting kind of vision of where the organization is going in the future. We feel that good visioning and priority setting is not bound by current convention or budget and resources. Strategic planning and visioning needs to look beyond the confines of what the budget or what the resources that you might have available today, and particularly if your organization has to function in a bit of a scarcity mentality. So if you get too bogged down on that, it's going to hinder the process, and it's just going to put guardrails around the ideas of big goals, big ideas that you may have in the future. But obviously, those ideas have to be based in reality. Oftentimes, when we do this process, we may start out with goals that are $1 billion or $900 million. Then we need to refine it down to about 600. Then we need to refine it down to about 300. I think those are the ranges of numbers that we work with San Jose State University. It's all different for all different institutions, but big thinking comes first, then whittling those down based on what the market will bear. And then finally, big, bold ideas that are inspirational to your donors, investors, and partners. Big ideas help to inspire those who are involved with the organization to be a part of the solution and your partner in making a difference. And that being able to think big is something that will excite and motivate your partners and investors. A quick story about a client who we are working with, who we recently tested a $30 to $35 million campaign. It was a campaign for capital, as well as infrastructure and additional programmatic priorities and some staff positions. They were all definitely needed priorities. With that said, there was also a very compelling vision that was being articulated by an inspirational CEO who prospects and donors had a lot of confidence in and a lot of faith in. But that vision was not necessarily coming across in the campaign statements and in the way that we were testing the campaign and the priorities and goals of the campaign. So the prospective donors said, think big, think bold. We know that there's a bigger, bolder vision out there. Come to us from a position of abundance, not scarcity. We want to help you achieve that vision. And by articulating that vision and that higher purpose, you are really going to inspire people who might not want to invest in what they perceive as needed priorities. So the goal has moved currently from about 33 million to 50 million. There are 2 additional initiatives that have been added that are reflective of what donors want to see. The donors are excited about these new ideas, and a lead donor prospect is now thinking of a gift that is much larger than original, an 8-figure gift that could potentially be matched by another 8-figure gift. So that's a good testament to the importance and the power of good visioning, priority setting, and goal setting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, Richard, and thanks to all of you who've signed on today. I wish we had the ability on this Zoom to see all of you. Maybe someday we'll get to that technology, but I appreciate all of you signing in on a topic that's very dear to us. I think there's a couple of important things to consider when your organization is thinking about a comprehensive or a capital campaign. Number one, let me just give you an example. I was working with a university at one time that had 8 or 9 different academic departments. And when we started talking about what do we want to raise money for, absolutely every single dean would say, I need a new building. Every single dean needed a new building. Well, those are a lot of interesting initiatives, but are those priorities? At the end of the day, I would have a conversation with each dean and I would say, well, that's a terrific idea. Who are your prospects? Well, I don't have any prospects. Well, that's begins the process of whittling initiative and a priority. So I think there's a couple of things that we need to bear in mind here. One is you really can't raise money for everything. I once had a college president say to me, we can't raise all the money that we want to for everything. So we need to pick our sweet spots. We need to determine those things for which private support will make a huge transformational difference. We need to pick our sweet spots. This president actually gave me a great example. He said, don't tell anybody this, but our geology program here at the university is kind of mediocre. We aspire to be better, but it is quite frankly mediocre. And we asked a lady if she would like to invest $1 million in our geology program, and she said no. And I said, why? And she said, because you don't have a very good geology program. So he realized right away that you need to pick those parts of your organization for which an investment in private support can make a huge difference and advance that program sort of down the line. The other thing I think that's critical about setting priorities is to engage the leadership of the entire organization, whether it's the senior leadership at your nonprofit, whether it's the cabinet at a president's cabinet at a university, whether it's the board of trustees or a foundation board. Many times people in organizations, perhaps unwillingly, but think that the fundraising program is the responsibility of advancement, but it's not. It's the responsibility of everybody. And when you're in the process of determining your priorities, you need to have everyone engaged in thinking about where we want the organization to move based upon the private resources we're able to bring to the organization. So I think you need to have a process to determine, to be able to sift the initiatives to the priorities, and you need to have the ability to engage your senior leadership, especially your trustees, I think, in determining what the priorities are. So Amy, let's move to the next slide. We'll talk just a little bit about, this is my recipe for making the priority cake. There's 6 ingredients in this. They're all really critical to the process of determining what your priorities are. One of the most overlooked, I think, areas in priority setting is preparation and planning. I'm sure all of our parents always used to tell us that, prior preparation makes for good whatever. It's very important to plan and to plan well. There's basically 6 different components here. We'll go through them one by one in just a second. But you need to have a process where you can evaluate each of these initiatives to determine whether they can meet the muster of being an actual campaign priority. You need to be able to talk about the priority. You need to create a narrative. It's kind of like a mini elevator speech where you're able to explain to others in very succinct terms what this priority is all about. Probably one of the hardest things to do in setting a priority is to put the budget together. Richard and I have worked with several institutions where the ideas are bold and they're transformational, but nobody has any idea how much the project or that priority is going to cost. And how much, if you're successful in bringing this new priority online, how much will it cost you to sustain it over time? That's also very important. And then, as I mentioned in my earlier comments, you need to be able to identify who the prospects are. We'll show you a little form that we use in our work to identify who the prospects are and who are the volunteers who can help you to realize the success of this priority, whether they be volunteer fundraisers or whether they be volunteers with your deans or with others in your organization. You need to be able to identify people that can help you down the road. And then finally, you have to be able to develop a good case for support. There's nothing more important, I think, in fundraising than a compelling case for support. And I know Sarah and her team work with clients all the time on creating these compelling cases for support. Okay, Amy. This is a little hard to read, at least it is on my screen, but you can see that this is kind of like a David Letterman 10 points that indicate different kind of criteria that you need to apply to an initiative as it moves toward becoming a priority. First of all, does this initiative fill a need or seizes an opportunity that may be in front of you? Is it aligned with your mission and values of the institution? Is it compelling for prospective donors? Richard and I worked with the client years ago, which had in their list of priorities, the #1 priority was a $60 million new academic building. There wasn't any question at all that they needed it. And everybody from campus folks to trustees to volunteers to donors said that's the #1 priority. And yet, as the campaign unfolded, not a single penny was raised for that academic building. Sounded like a great idea, but not out of my wallet. You just need to be able to have these priorities that really do appeal to the donors. These priorities need to be relevant to the mission statement. They need to be fully articulated in concept papers. You need to be able to explain to individuals why these particular priorities are important. So this little form helps you to, it's like a little checklist. You rate the priority or the initiative on this little 1 to 5 scale, and it helps you to determine whether or not something is really compelling or not. All right, Amy, let's move along. Oftentimes when we're working with individuals or organizations who are coming up, sort of narrowing the list from a whole list of initiatives to a small list of priorities, we say to those who are in charge of that particular priority, we'd like you to write a 1-page narrative, a compelling narrative that explains your priority and why it's important. And this little sort of a checklist for a priority narrative is really, really very helpful. What is the overview of the initiative? What outcomes do you hope to achieve if you're successful in funding this? Who are the potential donors? How long will it take you to do this? I mean, some priorities take years to unfold, especially if there's a building project involved. Why invest in this? Why do you want my resources to go into your priority? Can you write that up? This becomes like a little elevator speech. I'd like to say, if you've gone to a dinner party or a cocktail party and somebody says to you, what's going on in your organization? You've got one or two things that you can talk about right away because you've already thought about them. So the next one, Amy, and watch my time here. This is a little worksheet that we've developed over the years to help those who are trying to determine how much a priority will cost. It's very useful. It's oftentimes in trying to get folks to think big. I've had deans in the past who say, gee, if I only had $50,000 to do thus and such, I would say, well, what if you had $5 million? What could you do with that? So this helps you to think about all the different elements of costs for the priority to get a handle on it. Most often, it's very, very useful to sit down and do kind of a rough sketch of this and then engage somebody in the business office to test your numbers. And finally, Amy, it's very important in the early stages of developing a priority to determine who your volunteers and your prospects are. It's not all that often that all of these blocks are filled in. I mean, Sabra and I, when we were doing work at San Jose State, had a couple of deans who said, well, I can come up with 10 prospects, but I can't come up with 25. We said, that's great. That's terrific. But you need to have the leadership in the organization think about who it would be that you could bring this priority idea to. So this is just an exercise in determining who the most valuable people can be to your project. Do I have another one here, Amy? It is important to be able to clearly articulate the value of the priority to the organization. And so this is a little process that we use to be able to articulate the why of a priority. The first one is, how can someone help? What will it take to do that? Why should you invest in this project? Who will be the ones who are most directly benefited by this project? Who will the prospects be that can help make this happen? You need to be able to frame your case for support, be able to articulate clearly why someone should invest in your project. And this is just a little form that we use. It's been very, very helpful over time. Okay, Amy? So this is not a process that we always use, but we always recommend it. And Sabra's going to talk a little bit about this in just a minute, but when we were doing some priority setting process at San Jose State, we got the entire organization to the point where they had, gosh, I can't remember, Richard, it was 15 or 16 different priorities. The deans and those in leadership were all coached up to be able to present them to one another. And we took them all off on a 2-day retreat to talk about how to whittle down among all the wonderful ideas that have been developed. What were the ones that could achieve consensus for the campus? And this whole idea of reaching consensus was critically important. Some wonderful ideas fell off the table. Some ideas that seemed to be not terribly important in the beginning created a great deal of support from other people. And we also discovered that several of the priorities that had been developed could be combined to work together. And in most settings, if you can collaborate with others in these big fundraising ideas, that's all the more important, especially to donors. So that's the part of the priority setting process that we'd like to share with you this morning, and turn it over to Sabra, who's been through this.
Thank you, Peter. It's bringing me back to some fond memories. I'll just do a brief overview of the process that we undertook with Phoenix Philanthropy. As Peter mentioned, we began the process by really working with our leadership to prepare them for the retreat. So we met with them a number of times in order to talk about the process, expectations, get them to begin to think about what their big ideas could be. That preparation was vitally important. I think for many of us, it was the first time we had engaged in a priority setting process. So that preparation was vitally important. We then, after the internal preparation, we attended an offsite retreat with our leadership. It was a wide variety of folks from across our campus, from President's Cabinet to deans and academic leaders, as well as our development staff. Everybody practiced their pitches prior to the retreat, and at the retreat, each leader presented their 3 top ideas to the entire group, to Peter's point, to achieve consensus. We then undertook a fun process where we had Spartan bucks. Each of us had Spartan bucks to spend, and we would apply them to each of the ideas that we thought were the top idea. And through that process, the top ideas were identified. We then went through a more detailed process of looking through budget and prospects and narrative development. That work, frankly, still continues. And then we set expectations for what would happen after the retreat. When we started the retreat, or the process, we did not come in with set defined priorities. We let that happen organically. Each of our leadership went back to their individual units. They worked with their academic leadership, whether it was our athletic director or our dean of the library or dean of the College of Business, went back internally to discuss what their top priorities might be. I think that was great, not only because it created the opportunity to be inclusive, which ensured larger buy-in from our campus, but it also really helped us identify those priorities or those big ideas that we were really uniquely positioned to have an impact on and build on our very unique strengths as a university. We had gotten feedback from our first campaign that it was viewed as an internal advancement or just a development campaign. And I think Peter mentioned earlier, it really needs to be a campus-wide, or your entire institution needs to be a part of the campaign. It's not just the development team. The importance of big ideas. I hope as you undertake this process or as you consider the process, you'll see what we found is that there were no lack of big ideas. We had so many, it was hard to see some of them, as Peter explained, kind of fall off. But as we honed the ideas, it provides the opportunity to reach back, I think, at times, should we find a prospect that might be right for an idea that didn't bubble up to the top, perhaps. So we still have those kind of in our back pocket, even though our focus is on those top priorities that were identified through the retreat process. I'll say that creating these big ideas also creates a lot of internal excitement. So our deans and leadership got really excited about sharing their ideas with one another. And there became a lot of playful back and forth. Folks started to build upon each other. As Peter mentioned also, 2 of our priorities actually realized that they had a lot of synergy, and they combined efforts, and that continues today. Don't cut the process short, be deliberate, be from the start to the finish. The preparation before the retreat was vitally important to make sure, again, since it was kind of a first process for many of us, that there were some clear expectations. Phoenix Philanthropy helped set the agenda and then facilitate the process. And I think it's important to also understand that after the retreat and after you identify the priorities, there will still be a lot of work to follow. We're continuing to refine our budgets. We're continuing to refine the narratives. We undertook the process in October of 2019. The pandemic hit in early 2020. So we've had to rethink and kind of reframe some of our ideas. And I suspect probably even without a global pandemic that each of us will need to be a bit flexible in terms of our priorities, just depending on what will happen within our organizations. Creating partnerships was probably one of the most rewarding, I think, aspects of the process. I mentioned that two of our priorities combined, but we've seen such great worth in continuing these conversations that we still, as a development team, pull together what we call funding huddles. They're almost like a mini version of this retreat where, we have the opportunity to work with so many folks from across our institution. We're quite large. But we pull together, we on occasion see themes bubbling up in different areas. And so we'll pull folks together for a funding huddle to see if we can pull maybe what is a smaller idea in one part of our campus, pull them together to create kind of a bigger, larger strategic campus-wide potential initiative. And especially for our CFR team, that's particularly important. Corporate and foundations do like to see collaborative efforts. And so we've seen some really great opportunities develop that we continue to use. And then use this process to develop a culture of philanthropy internally and externally. To be frank, this is something that we'll all continue, I think, to need to feed and nurture on an ongoing basis. Internally, what that means for us is really weaving into our communications the kind of impact that philanthropy is having across campus, which is a good reminder to our faculty and staff about what it is we do and why we do it. And of course, we're all here, I work at a university, so we do this for our faculty, staff, and students. But I think in development, we all know that it is a team effort, but it is sometimes hard for our staff and faculty to see their role in philanthropy, but their impact is perhaps it's a little harder to see, but we see it on it every day. We've had donors who have, they walk into the library, they had a particularly positive experience with a librarian. They were looking to do some research and they then doubled their gift. That's a real story. So that librarian may not know their impact, but we heard about it and then we shared it back. And we still don't know who this particular librarian was, but each and every day across campus, we see their good work impacting our ability to bring resources to the campus. I think that's all I have, but I'd be happy to take questions after Peter and Richard. Thank you so much for asking me to join today.
Great. So I think I'm up next. Thanks, Sabra. And Richard, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this really interesting conversation today. It's really great to sort of see the connection between that vision setting and that priority setting and be able to make that connection all the way to storytelling for donors. Go ahead, Amy. So I wanted to start with a little bit of kind of our philosophy about donors and about making the case to donors. And I suppose I should say, we are a marketing communications agency, Littman Hearn. So our job is to convert those very important priorities and that vision into fundraising imperatives through storytelling, through communication tactics, messaging and channels that make donors feel that this is something that they must do. And our philosophy begins with this idea that giving really makes people stronger. We know it makes them happier. We know that it creates a sense of community. I mean, as fundraisers, I'm sure these are ideas that you share and think about. I believe that giving is fundamentally an act of optimism. That to invest in a campaign, to invest in the future is fundamentally an act of optimism. And that's why I love the work that I do, is because I feel like we get to bring optimism to the community. And at Littman Hearn, we really do think about the donor first. And we think about this idea that giving it is an expression of personal values. So we want to help donors where wear the institution and wear the campaign almost as a badge so that they can demonstrate, this is what I stand for. I believe in this institution and in the strength of this organization. So that is why I am part of this movement, this big, this campaign. Go ahead, Amy, we can go forward. So we think about kind of donor truths, and both Peter and Sabra were talking about that, kind of funding priorities and that visioning, and sort of where your mission is. That truth and that kind of campaign positioning is right at the intersection of your funding priorities, of your strategic plan, the mission of the institution, and what your donors care about. And that's sort of what we think of most in terms of how we tell the story. And what's really essential to remember is that donors are giving through your organization, through the institution, to what they value. And to remember that, we're sort of always trying to tell that story and deliver that sense of benefit, not sort of what we need, but what you as a donor can accomplish through us as your partner. Scope, scale, ambition, coordination, momentum, energy, those all matter. And, as Sabra was talking about, that idea of that continual exercise of bringing people together. I mean, that's so important. And that's what kind of keeps everybody, including if you're a university, your faculty, your deans excited and invested and involved with your donors. And if you're a small nonprofit, the same thing, your program officers, your leaders. And I should mention that these ideas are relevant and important, whether your campaign is a $10 million campaign or a $2 billion campaign. It doesn't matter. Your donors need to feel that they are investing in what they care about. Let's go forward. So that donor decision making, these are these kind of standard questions that I know every development officer knows. Why this institution? This goes to that that case document that Peter was talking about, that narrative that you need to create. Why this institution? Why these projects? Why now? What's happening right now that makes these ideas so important and critical? And then this why me question is, again, getting back to how do we reflect these priorities back to your donor in a way that helps them see themselves and make, kind of invest in what they care about. Go ahead, Amy. So just quickly, we want to make sure that we're packaging priorities that sort of casting them with that outside perspective in mind. So it's sort of taking all that hard work that you do through this vision setting and then just flipping it to make it what your audiences will care about. It's not about what you need. It's about how they benefit. And of course, we all know everybody's asking, so we have to kind of differentiate and make sure that they understand they're giving to what they care about. Go ahead. Amy, go ahead. Yeah, so and you can keep going. So I wanted to just quickly talk, I know I'm talking fast.
We're trying. Amy's trying.
No, I appreciate it. I'm a fast talker. I wanted to share just a little bit about some work we did with Caltech. The Caltech campaign actually launched in 2016. It just closed. And this was a very ambitious campaign. And it had actually, I think at one point there were 72 funding priorities that we worked with. We worked with the development team to kind of organize and cohere them in different groups. Some of the priorities, fit more than one bucket, but it was a way to start to organize the storytelling in a way. And the thing that I think is exciting about this campaign is that Caltech is a very specific, unique place. It's, it got outsized impact for the size of the institution, had a very ambitious goal, a $2 billion goal. We named the campaign Breakthrough, which in a different context may not have the kind of resonance that it did with the donors and investigators on campus, because Caltech really is a place that is making scientific breakthroughs and advancing knowledge constantly. And this name is both a compound noun and a verb, and that was intentional to sort of show the action of the campaign. And we always think about that, the campaign name as that sort of badge, so that you feel that you are really, wearing it. These are these are just sort of the headlines from the messages that we develop, and we take those funding priorities, those narratives, those kind of the scaffolding that we use to start to build that campaign storytelling for donors, to create sort of a platform that tells the story of the vision. It begins to shape the personality of the campaign and the personality of the marketing communications. So as you can see here, these are pretty bold statements. A few can change the world. High risk, high reward science is our sweet spot. And this idea that a little known truth about advancing knowledge, it's exhilarating. And it's exhilarating not only to the investigators and scientists, but to the donors who are involved. Let's go forward. So this message, I just wanted to unpack this one a little bit. A little known truth about advancing knowledge, it's exhilarating. This is an idea that we wanted to express that brings donors into the story as well. Go ahead, and I won't be impatient. You can move forward. Yeah, I'll read this to you. Caltech donors, like Caltech scientists and engineers, live for the next never been done moment. To boldly go is real for us, though it can feel as strange as fiction. Giant leaps, first glimmers, elegant surprises, and untidy revolutions are our domain. To do this work is a rare and joyous privilege. So what we've tried to do here was to connect the donor to the investigators and scientists at Caltech, and to say, we're in this together, and we are advancing science together. There was a lot of communications over these, 5-6 years. We were involved in the beginning and then kind of came back at the end. But we developed some tactics. You can click forward, Amy, and I'll just, this was a magazine, again, that was shared to tell the stories of impact, and stories of donors and how donors are involved. And part of our goal too is to bring the donor into the story. And obviously this gift, which is an extraordinary gift, was I think is a reflection of the Resnick's commitment to sustainability research. And they saw in Caltech a partner that could take the kinds of audacious risks to address climate that help solve big audacious problems that they wanted to impact. So we thought this was a sort of a good example of how telling those stories helps you achieve your goal. This is just the end of the campaign. The idea that it is continuing, the breakthrough is just the beginning, and it continues. I will say that the campaign closed at $3.4 billion against a $2 billion goal, which is really extraordinary. I know they're continuing to fundraise even though the campaign has closed. And I hope that this was, kind of a helpful model as you start to think about how you can convert these priorities to fundraising imperatives. And I know we have 15 minutes to have a lively conversation. I hope. Happy to answer questions. I know we all are. And thanks again for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much, Sabra and Sarah. That was terrific. And if any of you have questions, just feel free to send them in via chat. I've got a couple of questions and a couple of statements. First, with regard to what Sarah said about the resident gift, a $750 million gift against a $2 billion goal. Not only were those big, bold ideas in terms of what Caltech can do and what this campaign can realize, it obviously aligned with their values, and it was a bold goal. That dollar amount was bold. So that helps to set a higher goal, frankly, for your donor, for a major significant signature gift. So you can't keep elevating your goals based on desire versus reality. But if you take some risks in establishing your fundraising goals, it does help you to build the size of gift, the size of investment that may go along with it. So Sarah, a question for you is, when do you start the storytelling? That's a question that we get all the time. You know, we're in a quiet phase versus a public phase. Should we start, dripping this messaging out there? When do you think you start the storytelling?
Immediately, today. I mean, the storytelling versus the brand of the campaign, those are sort of two different things. And some organizations start to share that the brand of the campaign early on with close insiders, and they don't necessarily wait for a big reveal. But I think it's really important from the very beginning, as you start to frame those priorities, to be thinking about how you can shape those priorities in a way that starts to link the stories of what the campaign can accomplish, even before the campaign is public.
Great. A question for you, Sabra. I hope my numbers are roughly correct, but I think when we started this process with San Jose State, we came in first at around $900 million worth of initiatives. Then we had to whittle it down to 600. And the feasibility study told us that we had the capacity to do around $350 million. Talk a little bit about that process of, refining and narrowing the scope. Not only how did you do it, but how did you do it in a way that didn't upset those people whose priorities might not remain on the front burner?
So I think it was important for our campus partners to know that even if a priority didn't land on the final campaign list of top priorities, that it didn't necessarily mean that we would not be able to fundraise for it. There were a lot of good ideas, I think, as I mentioned, that maybe didn't rise to the level of a top priority, but there absolutely might be a donor who has great interest. So again, we're kind of keeping those in our back pocket, and hopefully we can find donors that might fit those other priorities. But it was a big challenge. We asked for big, bold, audacious ideas, and we sure got them. I hope in the future we can raise something in the line of what a Caltech does, but we've got some room to grow. Our feasibility did say that we landed at about $350 million, and that's what we're moving towards. We're in the quiet leadership phase right now. In terms of honing the priorities, we had to go back to our budgets and really refine one by one the budgets. We cannot endow each and every position for a particular project. So we had to really think about what is the most important pieces of the priority in order to make them happen. And so that was taken on by our leadership and in partnership with our DODs. And so we did some good work there in terms of refining. And then from there, we internally and with leadership also looked at all of the priorities to see what was feasible and realistic in terms of our ability and that unit's ability to fundraise. We certainly have areas of our campus who have a larger prospect prospect pool. And so our ability to fundraise, for our College of Business and engineering, certainly, we're able to have a larger kind of financial impact in those areas as opposed to some of our other areas of campus. So we kind of looked at those two different elements. We really took a hard look on that second piece, what was doable, as kind of a second phase to narrow those funds down.
Great. Peter, one for you. With a number of our clients, we have experienced changes in leadership from the first time when the priorities are established to, through the silent phase of the campaign, a public phase of the campaign. And sometimes there's a desire for wholesale change of what those priorities are. Sometimes it's just minor refinement. How do you balance that, as you go through a leadership change, whether it's a president and CEO or chairman of the board or some leading, program officers? How do you manage that with maintaining or slightly adapting the priorities as appropriate? And
Yeah.
Peter, there you go.
Well, I think almost every campaign that we've been associated with has had some form of leadership change, whether it's the president who changes or the vice president. Had a couple of those. There have been some wholesale changes in trustees. And it's not uncommon for, especially at the presidential level, for the president to say, these are wonderful priorities, but they're not mine. That is fairly rare that you'll have a wholesale change in priorities. But it's important, I think, to remember that in almost every campaign that we've been associated with, the priorities have had some either minor or major changes as you go along. I use this example of a client in Southern California that really did need to build a new academic building. I mean, it was a huge building, $60 million, and everybody loved the idea, but it never resonated with a single donor. Even trustees who thought it was a great idea didn't want to make a contribution. So I think it's important to remember that these priorities in the early stages are not set in stone. They're the ones that you want to focus on as you begin the campaign, but sometimes you need to be careful that these priorities may adapt and change over time. So normally what we've been doing with some clients is to have periodic discussions about, are these still the most relevant priorities? Because sometimes they're not. And it's I think important to recognize when a priority is becoming less and less important. Don't keep spending time and energy and resources on a priority that's sort of fading away. Look for, as Sabra said, there's plenty of other priorities on the list that you can attend to. And I think the other thing I would make a point on is that we've talked about setting priorities and creating a list of internal priorities. The feasibility study, the feasibility or the market positioning study that's done after you've internally decided what the priorities are, that's critically important as well. We have seen in the past, it doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen, where a campus might have 15 or 16 different priorities, but when you test them in the community with 30 to 40 to 50 interviews, not all of them pop to the top from people on the external side of things. So I think one of the key words in campaigning is flexibility. You just need to be able to be flexible, whether it's a leadership change or change in donor perceptions of your priorities, or it could be internal changes in perceptions of priorities. You need to be flexible.
One thing that we've noticed that priorities can change or be adapted based on changes in leadership, maybe changes in institutional need, and obviously changes in market opportunity, and that's particularly donor interest. And so that flexibility is really important. You need to, though, be careful about inviting what is perceived to be wholesale change, because the process that you've gone through of establishing these priorities is an important and inclusive and legitimate one. So if you're open to kind of the wills of people to quickly change the priorities, then you're losing the traction, the knowledge that came together in that. Tweaking is good. You know, you got to be, again, you got to be flexible, but that wholesale change is, I think, a challenge. The other thing is that, you know, we have goals in a campaign, we have priorities, and every bucket isn't going to get filled up exactly like you designed it at the beginning of the campaign. And one thing that I think is really important from the very beginning is to constantly have a conversation with the CFO, with the, you know, the head of programs, other people around your nonprofit organization, so that you know that, you know what, if we're filling this bucket over here for this program, but this one isn't happening at all, how can we balance that? And how can you realign other institutional resources, either through budget relief or whatever it may be, but how can you kind of realign resources? It's about philanthropy, but it's more than just philanthropy. It's looking at the overall revenue stream that you have. And I would say one final point that we didn't really talk about much is, and it was on the little budget worksheet that Peter had, is the issue of endowment versus current use money, or endowment, you know, versus money that's going to be expended over a 1, 3, 5, you know, 10-year period. We were working in the campaign, the same one that had the $60 million building that didn't go anywhere. And one of the faculty members, every initiative was a $50 million endowment, you know, and trust me, everything didn't warrant being an endowment, and everything, and we didn't have the prospects that would invest that much money and wait that long for results. So we had to look at balancing good, legitimate priorities, but breaking it down into manageable investments that could be expended or raised, you know, in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. So a $50 million initiative becomes more like $1 million or $2 million when you are looking at mounting that program, getting it going, seeing results, and then later look at the endowment. So before I wrap it up, anybody have any questions that you want to, and I'm looking at not only the people who are on the webinar, but any of our team here of Peter and Sarah and Sabra. Anything else you want to highlight?
I just want to put a big exclamation point on what you just said, Richard. I think in some cases for our institution, some of the priorities will have to focus on those programmatic elements where we can show more immediate impact, and then we can grow into a space where we can find those dollars to endow the positions and kind of do some more longer term thinking. But I think it's pretty clear that we'll have to be able to show some pretty immediate impact in order to get to that next phase. So thank you for sharing that.
All right, well, thank you, Sabra, Sarah, and Peter. Thanks all for attending. And just in close, some key takeaways are: 1, align your fundraising priorities and goals with the organization's mission, vision, and strategic plan, and your donors' interests and values. Extend visioning, priority setting, and goal setting across the institution, and really involve everyone in that process in an inclusive process of building. Think big and bold. Don't be confined by current convention or current budget. Think beyond that, but obviously have it in mind so it's not extraordinarily high. Move donors from donors to investors to partners, because they'll want to really be a partner with you in accomplishing and achieving those big, bold ideas. And then position your priorities and share that story and inspire your donors with a terrific case for support. So thanks. Happy holidays, happy new year. We'll see you in the new year, and we will have an article out in a few weeks about this, which we'll share with you. But if any of you have any further questions or need anything from us, just let us know.
All right.